I thank the Deputy Premier and recognize the member from Nelson Creston.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. It gives me great pleasure to rise in this House to represent the wonderful people in the Nelson Creston area and to speak on their behalf today about how this budget impacts them and how it impacts their lives. And before I continue on with that, I think it's important to remind ourselves that a budget is supposed to be the actions, it's supposed to be the very defined activities that government is going to take, that they're going to put the taxpayers' money behind to back up what they said in the throne speech. That is their agenda. And we just see a lot of discrepancies between the two of those documents, the two of those speeches, when we look at the budget compared to the throne speech. There are many things, many slogans specifically, Honourable Speaker, that were delivered in that throne speech, and we don't see a single mention of them, much less a single action behind those slogans in the budget. And I know that when people back home in Nelson Creston were looking at that and comparing the two, I know that they were very disappointed, because when they heard words like violence-free BC, they thought that that would mean better services at our local Nelson and District Women's Centre. They thought that that would mean perhaps secondary stage housing from the transition centres, the transition homes in Nelson and Creston, perhaps a transition home an hour north of Nelson in Caslow. But there isn't a dime for any of those things. The violence-free BC, unfortunately, Honourable Speaker, remains a slogan. And what that shows us, that is just an example of how the government's agenda in the throne speech was all talk. It is not backed up by the dollars and cents that show that government plans to take action. And I know for people in my area, I mentioned Caslow just a moment ago, I was recently reading a document that highlighted that 41%, I was blown away at that number. 41% of Caslow residents are living below the poverty line. I couldn't believe it. People every day in one of the most beautiful places in the world are struggling to make ends meet, quietly struggling to make ends meet. And I hear about it from my friends every day, my friends in my age group, the young families who are living in a small little house on their parents' property because they can't afford to buy their own home. And I'm going to talk more about one of the reasons why that is later on, Honourable Speaker. But when 41% of the population of Caslow is living below the poverty line, make no mistake that many of those residents are children. And that's one of BC's most shameful legacies in this last decade, is child poverty, having the worst rate of child poverty in this entire country. And you would think that after 10 years of having the worst rate of child poverty, that any government, no matter what their political stripe, would be called into action, would feel the motivation, would feel inspired to take action, real concrete steps, lay out a plan, and implement that plan to stop child poverty. But unfortunately, in this budget, not a word. Not a word. Not a word on child poverty, not a word on the fact that British Columbia has had the highest overall poverty rate in this country for the entire time the Liberals have been in government. That's their legacy in this province. We have the worst poverty. 50% of children living with single moms, Honourable Speaker, are living in poverty. That's 153,000 children are living in poverty in BC. Breaking that down, that's 1 in 5 kids. So if we look at a classroom that isn't overcrowded and perhaps only has 20 kids. Think about that. 5 kids in every classroom don't have the supplies that they need every day to do their schoolwork. 5 kids in every classroom have parents who can't afford class field trips. 5 kids in every single classroom dream of playing sports, but they can't afford the equipment. And if it weren't for amazing organizations like Kids Sport, who's doing a tremendous job in my riding of helping those kids, they would never grow up to be the Olympians that they dream to be. And worst of it all, the basics. We all have this in common in the house. We all need to eat, and 5 kids in every classroom, 5 kids are going to school hungry. And if you don't believe me, all you need to do is open up the Vancouver Sun over the holiday season and read an article every day about their Adopt a School program. How they're doing fundraising. The Vancouver Sun is doing fundraising to help schools with breakfast and lunch programs to feed kids who are coming to school hungry. And it's not reaching every single kid, Honourable Speaker. The Adopt a School program, and they recognize this at the Vancouver Sun, they recognize this, that they can't get to every kid, and that government needs to play a better role. And you'd think that they would feel that as well over on that side of the house. Unfortunately, we don't see any of that in this budget. So when we talk about 5 kids in every classroom struggling to get enough food to eat, to get them through the day, so that they can learn better, so that they can achieve better, so that they can go on to be adults who can meet their dreams. They can't get the food every day. It's no wonder that 30% of food bank clients are children. Just 5 years ago, it was 25%, and we thought that was too high. 1/3 of all food bank users are kids. I don't think anybody in this room thinks that that's okay. And if you don't think it's okay, then you would do something about it. But not this budget. So what does it look like? What does it look like when a child goes to a food bank? Let me just put that into perspective for members of the House. I had the experience of managing the Nelson Food Cupboard for 2 years, about 10 years ago. And unfortunately, in that experience, food banks are always the first people who want to put themselves out of business. And 10 years ago, I would watch parents come in embarrassed that they couldn't put food on the table for their child. They had no other option. That's what it looked like. Many of them couldn't afford childcare, and their kids came with them. They had no other option. Could you imagine what that's like for a child to look up to mom or dad at the food bank, knowing that mom or dad can't afford the basic necessities of life? It's crushing. And you would see it. I would see it. Parents asking if we had a few granola bars stashed away so that they could put some snacks into their kids' lunches for school. If we had some cereal stashed away so that they could provide a breakfast to their child or children, many of them having more than one child, so they could have breakfast on the table for their kids in the morning. Sometimes we had those items, and sometimes I had to say, I'm sorry, we don't. And sometimes I had to watch those parents walk out the door feeling so desperate that they contemplated having to perhaps break the law and steal food for their kids. That's going on in British Columbia in every single community right now, and that's not acceptable. That is not acceptable, Honourable Speaker. And we all know that it's not acceptable. And we all know that action is needed. But in this budget speech, there's not a dollar towards a poverty reduction plan. There's no effort to look at the complexities of poverty and its negative impacts on our economy. There's been plenty of research to this, Honourable Speaker, where poverty is costing this province $6 to $9 billion every year in lost productivity, in healthcare costs and education costs, in criminal justice costs and income assistance costs. Think about how much we could save British Columbia. An ounce of prevention is always worth a pound of cure. And that ounce of prevention could save British Columbian economy tremendously. So they don't ask themselves when setting up this budget how we can make sure that BC's economy includes everybody, that parents have what they need to best support their children. In fact, what I saw in this budget, Honourable Speaker, wasn't the Liberals saying, how can we reduce child poverty? How can we make life more affordable for families? Rather, it was how they can get their hands deeper into the pockets of some of the people who can least afford it. And let's look at the ways they found to do just that. Medical services premium. It's, in taxation terms, it's a regressive tax. It's a flat tax. Everybody's paying the same. Those who make the most money pay the same as those who can least afford it. So it burdens those who can least afford it more. That's going up 4%, January 1st, 2015. It's doubled since 2001. Families are now paying $1,738 per year for the medical services premium, a regressive tax. And what's interesting is that, as I said, it's going up 4%. In 2012, the Premier promised that increases in medical services taxes would only keep pace with increases in health spending. So, if things are going up 4%, on the premium tax side, you would expect that spending in healthcare would be also going up 4%. You're going to pay a little bit more to get a little bit more, is the expectation of families all across BC and particularly in Nelson Creston. But that's not what's happening. MSP is going up 4%, but in the budget, health spending is rising by 2.6%. So a broken promise right there from the Premier. What she said, all her talk outside of this House, is not being backed up by action inside of this House. So, are people getting value for their dollar? Well, the Auditor General, Russ Jones, issued a report today showing that the Liberal government can't demonstrate that physician services are high quality.
Members. Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It gives me great satisfaction to know that I'm causing greater debate in this House, even while I am talking.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
So the Auditor General pointed out in his report delivered today, we adopted it in this House, and that report shows that the Liberal government can't demonstrate that physician services are high quality, nor can they demonstrate that the money provided for physician services is cost effective. So the public doesn't have a reassurance that that increase in their MSP is even going to be felt in the most effective way in their day-to-day lives. And that's truly unfortunate. So when families are paying more, here we have an example of where they are getting less. Another place where families are paying more Our insurance rates, those are up by 4% as well as of last November. Ferry fares, up $32 round trip. Now, in Nelson Creston, on Kootenay Lake, we do like to boast about the longest free ferry ride in the world. We had to fight for that free ferry back in 2001, 2002, when it was under threat by the Liberal government, looking to privatize and put fares on that ferry. The ferry that connects communities on the east and west shores of Kootenay Lake, it is our lifeline, it is our highway, and they were looking to charge us for it, and we fought tooth and nail, and I have to say the good people of Nelson Creston won that fight, and I'm not surprised that they did, because when they put their minds to something in Nelson Creston, they're going to make sure it happens. But many of them travel to visit their family and friends on Vancouver Island and all along the coast of British Columbia. And they're going to be paying an extra $32 a round trip, and we've heard much in this House about the cuts to ferries despite the increase in cost to families. Again, an example of families paying more and getting less. Hydro rates. Now there's a great example of paying more, and paying more. 28% is the projected increase for BC hydro rates. 28%. That's a huge dig into the pockets of BC's families from this Liberal government. And even though we're fortunate enough in Nelson to have Nelson Hydro, publicly owned utility, we also have Fortis in the area producing our own hydro. In fact, just so everybody knows, one of the reasons that Nelson Creston likes to get its way is because we produce 50% of BC's hydroelectricity, so when you get us angry, we turn off your lights. But even though we're producing our own hydro in the region, and people might think that that hydro rate increase isn't impacting us, and it is up in the north end of Kootenay Lake, who are on hydro, but the majority of us saying, oh, we don't have to worry about it, we're on Fortis, we're on Nelson Hydro. We buy power from BC Hydro. And I talked with Fortis, I talked with Nelson Hydro, and they said, yes, they're going to have to funnel those increased costs right down to the ratepayer in Nelson Creston. So yes, our pockets are being dug for hydro rate increases. And Mr. Speaker, we've heard members opposite from the Liberal government talk about their child tax credit of $650 per year. And I know that's going to be welcomed by a lot of families, as it should be. The unfortunate reality to this, though, is that they are taking while they're putting $650 in one pocket, they're taking $900 a year out of another pocket, leaving families, to do the math, $250 short. So they can brag and brag and brag about one thing and conveniently ignore another, and that that thing that they're ignoring is that they're taking more money out of British Columbians' pockets than they are putting into them. But don't worry, they say. Everything will be just fine. If the big corporations make unprecedented profits, the revenue will trickle down to the rest of us. It's an old framework of reference. It's been done for as long as I've been alive. The trickle-down economics. Unfortunately, trickle-down economics has only proven to exacerbate, recovering from a cold, got a scratchy voice. It's only proven to exacerbate costs onto families and make the rich more rich. Families' personal debt ends up going up while government back away from responsibilities, and the biggest corporations run away with all the profits. So it's not really debt-free BC, despite the slogans on the side of the bus, because it's not debt-free for BC families. BC families are going to have to dig deeper, put those grocery bills on the credit cards, make the minimum payments each month, go further into debt just to pay for the basics, just to pay for milk and bread. And actually, Mr. Speaker, to be fully frank, to be fully honest, let's be real here. It's not even debt-free BC for BC. Despite all the debt-free rhetoric, again, all that talk, total government debt from this budget will rise by $7.1 billion over three years and reach $68.9 billion by the end of 2016-17 fiscal year. And then they talk about, oh, well, LNG will fix all that and everything, and that's just fine. But it's completely unrealistic. If you just do the basic math, as I'm sure many people have been doing, if you do the basic math, it's unrealistic that LNG could eliminate all this debt by 2028. The reality is that the biggest contributor to BC's debt has been this Liberal government over its entire 12-year tenure. The largest deficits in BC history are their legacy. It's the result of their budgets. And here we are again, putting more debt onto BC. So what do we have? All talk and no action that proves that it's the truth. Don't worry, they say again, though. Just ignore that. Don't read our budget books. Ignore that. Just get a job. Well, if it were only that simple. If it were only that simple that everybody could just go out and get a job tomorrow, and that would eliminate child poverty and the highest overall poverty rate in this country. If it were only that simple. But it's not that simple, as we know. There's many complexities that make it difficult for people to get jobs. The most obvious one is, are there any jobs? Well, not from this government. Right now, BC is in last place for private sector job creation. 8,500 private sector jobs lost last month. The month before that, in December, 8,200 jobs gone. In the 200 days the Liberals kept us out of this House, BC lost 21,400 jobs.
Wow.
And even the government's own documents say BC's labour market performed poorly last year compared to other provinces, as only Nova Scotia registers a greater annual rate of decline in employment. So the jobs are disappearing from BC, and the people are leaving BC as well. That does not spell out good for our economy. And when you say to people, just go get a job, I have this beautiful 9-page document called the BC Jobs Plan. Doesn't it look good? This cover's really nice. And there's a great slogans inside of it. But British Columbians expect more than a slogan. They expect to actually see some job creation in this province. And they're not seeing it with this Liberal government. So when it comes to jobs, the only thing this government has for British Columbians, as I said, is slogans. But of course, let's remind the House that for failed Liberal candidates and Liberal insiders, they have plenty of plum, high-paying jobs. And if the wages weren't high enough, don't worry. They'll increase the wages to make them high enough for their friends. And it is this kind of crass approach to governing where you make sure that your friends have jobs, high-paying jobs, and if they're not paying high enough, don't worry, we'll increase the wages. That breeds cynicism in our democracy, and it's shameful, Mr. Speaker. So what, for the majority of British Columbians who are not failed Liberal candidates, what does this government have for them? Okay. Higher tuition fees. And another broken promise about improving access to skills training. Mr. Speaker, we know that 80% of jobs will soon require some level of post-secondary education, but the skills gap in this province is hindering British Columbians from getting those jobs. They need to get the training, but they're struggling to get that training, and it has negative impacts on our economy. We've got people without jobs, jobs without people, and it costs companies hundreds of millions of dollars in project delays and cost overruns. They go out to temporary foreign workers, and unfortunately, some of the companies seeking out temporary foreign workers have treated them poorly, have provided unfair working conditions, and these are jobs that could have been filled by British Columbians if they would have been able to get the training. But this is what has happened instead. The government, again, talks a lot about skills training and everything that they're going to do for skills training, but this is what we saw in the budget. We saw cutbacks. We saw flat-line budgets. We saw no actual fiscal plan that was targeting skills training, and this is what's happened. Tuition has doubled since the Premier went to university. BC boasts the highest average student debt load and is the only province to offer no financial needs-based grants. Students have to go into massive debt. They cannot get any financial needs-based grants to attend post-secondary education and get the skills training that they need. And when you talk to students, they'll say that the high cost of living in this province is, of course, the added burden. So Liberals are making it harder to get the training needed to get the jobs. Liberals are also making it harder to get the jobs, period. After making massive changes to the employment services programs in this province, Work BC, they are now cutting the budget nearly in half, removing $25.5 million out of the very services that help people get jobs. Now, this doesn't jive with any realistic jobs plan, further showing that what this Liberal Premier offers is all talk. She talks about a jobs plan, but when it comes to helping you get that job, those services are being cut. And I have to say that when I went to visit some of the employment centres in this province, they are doing amazing work. And I have to give full credit to them for the work that they're doing on the front line with British Columbians, helping them get some basic training, many some literacy training, some computer literacy training, or just helping them draft a resume, practicing interview skills. All of these things are helping British Columbians every day get the jobs that they need. Anybody going into one of these Work BC centres and seeing the good staff there do the work that they do would be impressed. But they are worried. They are worried that they're not going to be able to deliver services to clients based on the new fee-for-service structure. Peers here in Victoria has had to shut down its employment services because it did not work with the funding model that this government is now using. But now, it's not getting better, it's getting worse because the government is cutting the program dollars for these important centres that are helping British Columbians get the jobs that they need to have a good life. Another area, Mr. Speaker, that I was actually quite shocked not to see any mention at all in either the throne speech or the budget is what's going on with what's happening in the Ministry of Social Development. This is a key area for the Ministry of Social Development, is the Disability White Paper. The Premier tasked the Minister with going out, talking to British Columbians, developing a white paper to make BC the most progressive jurisdiction in Canada for people with disabilities. I think that's something that we could all support, but not mentioned at all. Mr. Speaker, the people of Nelson Creston want to see real investments from this government. They want to see investments in healthcare, in education. They want to see real action on climate change rather than a final cut to the Live Smart program. They want to see employment programs, post-secondary education. They want to see investment in forestry, agriculture, creative and cultural industries in our region. They want to see investment in tourism. They want to see real action, not talk. British Columbians deserve better. People in Nelson Creston deserve better. They deserve better than pay more, get less.
Yeah.
Thank you.